Well, good morning. It's good to be here with you all as we are continuing our series, A New Beginning. Some of you have been with us already so far in this series, and it's been all about how to start a new beginning and have new in these different areas of our life. And the first week we talked about how we want to have a new heart, and then followed by last week we talked about how to have a new mind. And today we're going to talk about how we can have a new focus, right? And how many of us know that if you wear glasses, then you know how important focus is, right? If you wear glasses, you know how important focus is. If you maybe work in the medical field or you're a surgeon, how important is it that your surgeon has good focus? You better have the best focus if you're going to operate on somebody, right? Like, you better have the best focus, right? And so it's important in all these different other areas of our life. But today what I want us to kind of focus in on is what does it look like spiritually for us? What does focus look like spiritually for us? Because I would argue that a lot of us have our focus elsewhere. If you were to ask yourself and take a step back, where is your current focus? For some of us, the answer might be, well, right now I'm just really focusing on my career. Or for right now, I'm just really focusing on myself, right? Or you're focusing on maybe your finances. Or if it's the season for a certain hobby, maybe you're focusing on that hobby. And so for many of us, at different times of our life, different seasons, maybe the focus kind of changes. And the problem is, it's not that it's a bad thing for you to be focused and have, goal-oriented or whatever. The problem is when the focus from God takes a down step, right? When it takes a step down and it no longer becomes an important part of our life. And so today I want to look at what the Apostle Paul says and what he wrote to the church in Corinth. As he was writing this part of this chapter, he was telling about all the troubles that he had, right? All the issues he had gone through, the difficulties, right? Paul battled unbelievers and people that fought the gospel message. And he experienced great persecution. Now I'm talking real persecution, right? Not just Facebook persecution, okay? That's a different level of persecution. Could be very real and feel very real, but it's not like the persecution that the apostles have gone through, right? So he's experiencing all of these challenges. And it's refreshing to see what Paul says about this in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 16. So he says this, "Therefore we do not lose heart. Though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. For our light and our momentary troubles are achieving us for an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen. Since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal." Now, I love this perspective that he has where he's telling the people that he's writing this letter to, that he says, man, all these things around us, outwardly, we're all wasting away. These things are fading away. But inwardly, day by day, you and I are being renewed. And so what he's redirecting them to is saying this, hey, no matter what the trouble is, we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen. Since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. And here's the reality. Everything that we see outside, from that old tree that you maybe recognize in your hometown that you grew up next, playing on or whatever, it will not last forever. It may live. I know trees got a long life. They live a long time, I know. But they will not last forever. Eventually they will die. Eventually it will fade. And so we have to fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on these things that we cannot see. And this is where Paul is redirecting the focus of the people in this church. He's encouraging them to fix their focus on those things that are unseen. I want to share with you guys a story of, there was a man named Ron Bailey in 2005 who became the first amateur American to enter something called a Dakar rally. Okay, now this rally is the most dangerous off-road race in the world. At the age of 54, Bailey had to walk his way into this race. He spent $300,000 to build this custom-built car and line up against 1,400 other competitors for a 7,000-mile race. Now, this race was not done here in the United States, but this race, among the obstacles, it had sandstorms in the Sahara Desert. It had civil strife, bandits, and landmines. Okay, in 2005, only half of those people that entered the race finished the race, and 5 people died, including 2 professional racers. I'm not sure why my man Ron would think it's a good idea to go participate in this event, but nevertheless, here he was, right? So in 2005, though he trained hard for the race, Bailey and his co-driver immediately ran into a sandstorm, okay? And shortly after running into the sandstorm, they ran out of gas. And for 5 days, they lived on 1 day's worth of water and a single sack lunch. Okay? Finally, someone arrived with gas, and Bailey was on his way again. With a missed checkpoint, okay, Bailey was disqualified from the race, but he finished the race anyways. And by the end of his experience, Bailey wasn't talking so much about the fact that he missed his finish line or about the fact that he was disqualified, but the perspective that he had was, he said, I know now that Dakar is not a race, but it is a test of a man's character. It is a test of a man's character. Now, if you're racing on this 7,000-mile endurance race with landmines on it, okay, losing focus could not only cost you the finish line, but it could cost you your life. And for us too, in our walk with God, in our lives, losing focus on the finish line, of our life's purpose could cost us our spiritual health. It could make us spiritually dead if we're not focused on what is the right thing to focus on, right? Paul's eyes were on eternal glory. And he constantly had this recalibration, redirection, that even as he did accomplish several worthy tasks in his life, accomplishing, starting a bunch of churches, spreading the good news, the message, helping form an organized theology for the first century church, even though he did these things, he said, I fix my eyes on what I will finish and completion in eternity. He had this finish line fixed on what is unseen. And this is what he's writing to the church in Corinth, where he's encouraging them to fix their eyes on not what is seen, but on what is unseen, the things of God that we cannot see. Yesterday, I had the opportunity to officiate a memorial service. And it was so moving, just seeing everybody come together. And it was powerful to see how we're in this small little room, and by the end of the service, you could feel God's presence in the room. You could just feel that God was comforting people. The daughters of the lost loved one being comforted with family. They did this beautiful thing where they released doves into the air after the reception. And there was just no doubt that God was there. And yet, of course, God is unseen. Heaven is unseen. Hell is unseen. Eternity isn't visible. And this is what makes it so hard to focus on what is unseen, because the reality is that the seen yells at us so much in our day-to-day. Right? You see your job. You see your boss. You see your coworkers that maybe you don't like very much. You see all these different situations, and we see it, and it screams really loud for our focus. And because of it, the unseen leaves our mind. The unseen, the reality that we have the opportunity to live our life in a way where we're storing up eternal treasures, but we focus so much. And if we had the right perspective to see that our life on earth is so short of a time compared to how long eternity is. And so what is some of those things that are seen, right? Our bank accounts are seen, our homes, they scream for our focus, right? However, one day if you and I woke up and there was no air, we wouldn't live very long, would we? Because the unseen is something we depend on a lot. And so it's indicative, and as we see that, it just kind of highlights even more so how much more important the things of God, the spiritual things are, because we can't see them. But they're so important, and they require our focus. Now, Paul, he continued, to write and encourage the church to have this gauge for not losing sight of the wrong thing, right? Not being focused on the wrong thing. And I came across this letter that was really moving, and I want to read it to you guys. It was written by a Southern Baptist missionary that was sent to Iraq to share the good news of Christ, and was murdered and persecuted for her faith in Iraq. Her name was Karen Watson. And this is what she writes. She writes, Dear Pastor Phil and Pastor Roger, you should only be opening this letter in the event of my death. When God calls, there are no regrets. I try to share my heart with you as much as possible, my heart for the nations. I wasn't called to a place, I was called to Him. To obey was my objective, to suffer was expected. His glory, my reward, His glory, my reward. One of the most important things to remember right now is to preserve the work. I am writing this as if I am still working with my people group. I thank you all so much for your prayers and support. Surely your reward in heaven will be great. Thank you for investing in my life and my spiritual well-being. Keep sending missionaries out. Keep raising up fine young pastors. In regards to any service for me, keep it small and simple. Yes, simply just preach the gospel. Be bold and preach the life-saving, life-changing, forever eternal gospel. Give glory and honor to our Father. The missionary heart is this: care more than some think is wise, risk more than something is safe, dream more than some think it's practical, and expect more than some think is possible. I was called not to a comfort or success, but to obedience. There is no joy outside of knowing Jesus and serving him. I love you too and my church family. In his care, Karen. And I can't help but, as I read this letter, knowing that she wrote this with the expectation and knowing that her life would be lost. And yet that sounds like the words of somebody that is fully at peace in their life. Fully at peace in their life and the decisions that they made, knowing that there was no greater joy in her life than knowing Jesus and serving him. And she was prepared because she knew that the things that would be eternal could not be taken away. The things that we do for God cannot be taken away, no matter what. And so she knew she had her focus on the right thing. She had her focus on the right finish line of her life. And see, here's what some of us try to do is we try to put our own finish lines in our life, right? Surely when I cross this threshold, then I will be happy. And for some of us, it's not self-imposed finish lines, but it's finish lines that maybe our parents gave us. Finish lines that maybe our school advisor gave us. And we're like, well, I got to do what Mr. So-and-so said, or I got to do what mom and dad said, because surely that's the only way that then I will feel fulfilled. Surely that's the only way that I will feel accomplished. But just like the driver that was on this mission, he said, man, that wasn't the finish line. The finish line was my character through the process. That was the finish line that I was really after, not the result, but what was going to happen through the process. And so for us, I pray that we would lose sight of these finish lines that we self-impose for ourselves, because the reality of all these finish lines is they'll all fade. They'll all fade. And guess what? The success of crossing one finish line won't last very long. I remember when I moved to college, my mom had like literally all of my awards that I had gotten for her, like in school, she had them all in my room, right? And after I left for college, literally my room did not change. It looked exactly the same. I'm like, Mom, you don't want to do anything with this space, you know? Like, I would think you would, get creative with it. And she goes one day, son, do you want to take all this stuff? Like, you should put it up where you live. I'm like, I'm not putting that stuff up. Like, what? I'm not going to put all that stuff up. And I said, no, honestly, I don't care what you do with it. She goes, Mijo, how can you not care? How can you not care for this stuff? And I said, Mom, it's not that I don't care for it. It's great. But it doesn't define who I am right now. It was a part of my process. But see, oftentimes you got to recognize that the success that you had in the past season, it's not your identity for who you're going moving forward. And it's not the thing that you should allow to define you. Because if you do, too many of us are defining ourselves for something we did 10 years ago. And you're finding identity in that because you did it 10 years ago. And it may be great. It may be something good that you did. But it doesn't fit your future anymore. And you have to focus on the eternal things, because just like all temporary things, those trophies, those degrees, those certificates, all of them will fade. My mom still has some of mine from like 3rd grade, and she had them in this thing, and there was all kinds of mold in this basket or whatever. And I was like, Mom, get rid of these. She's like, mijo, I can just laminate them. I'm sick. You want to laminate the mold? Like, that's what you want to do, Ma? You want to laminate the mold? Like, you know what I'm saying? It's like, Ma, let it go, right? I get it, a mother's love. I get it, okay? I get it. But I'm just saying, is that oftentimes we find our worth in past finish lines we've crossed, and they fade. And they fade, and they don't fit the finish line of our future, the eternal finish line that will live on forever. Right? The legacy we leave our families. I love Donnie's story when we play Donnie's story, because I'm always reminded of, I want to do the work that God has set for me so that when I die, it will have some sort of lasting impact on my son. So that when I die, people that knew me would know what I was about. Listen, the material things, all of it will get. So who knows who will end up with it? Hopefully my son, right? But who knows who will end up with it? It will all fade. But the legacy that I can leave behind, maybe to instill in my son, to be a man of faith, to be a man of honor, and to lead his life and lead his family to do the same. To continue to share the good news and reach more souls for Christ. That's an eternal thing that will not fade, that will last forever. And so when we make decisions here on earth, they have eternal consequences. They have eternal consequences. And we have to think about those things because that finish line does not fade. Right? So we need to make sure that we have our eyes set on the right finish line of our life. Now, if you go a couple of verses earlier in 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 7 through 10, look at what he continues, what he starts off by saying. He says, "But we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that this all-surpassing power is from God and not from us. We are hard pressed on every side, but not crushed. Perplexed, but not in despair. Persecuted, but not abandoned. Struck down, but not destroyed. We always carry around in our body the death of Jesus so that the life of Jesus may also be revealed in our body." I love the comparison, right, that Paul is making here. He says, we have this treasure in jars of clay, the treasure of the gospel, of the good news. And guess what? We have it not in a fancy vase, not in a fancy statue or any of those things, but in clay. In ordinary clay, jars of clay. You and I, he's drawing this comparison to himself to jars of clay. This apostle himself, the humility that he walks in to just be like, you know what? We're nothing but jars of clay, but we carry the treasure of the message that's inside. That's what we carry. Right? How fragile are jars of clay? Pretty fragile, right? And I would imagine, like he's saying, some of us maybe are jars of clay that find ourselves hard pressed on every side, but you're not crushed, are you? You may be hard pressed in the situation you're in, but you're still here. You're not crushed. You may be perplexed, but you're not in despair. You may be persecuted, but no matter the persecution, you're not abandoned. You may be struck down, but you're not destroyed. You're still here. And just like these jars of clay, right? We're fragile. We are ordinary. But despite how imperfect the jar of clay is, despite how fragile it is sufficient for the purpose of holding on to this treasure that it holds it within. And so you and I, as imperfect as we are, we can still, by grace, receive the message that is this treasure of who Christ is. And I love this comparison because, again, it shows not only Paul's humility, but just Paul wanting us to see this perspective that we are ordinary clay. But that gives clay the value is not the clay itself, but the treasure that the clay holds. And so you and I are valuable not because we are, but because of who God says we are and who God has made us through Christ. That's why we hold value. That's why we're valuable. Right? And again, Paul, being a simple jar of clay, was able to do some amazing things for the kingdom of God. But even beyond this, I think that an important thing to note from this is that if you're waiting for things in your life to be perfect, if you're waiting on the perfect job, the perfect spouse, the perfect church, then you're going to be waiting for a really, really long time. Okay, so get your popcorn now because you're going to be here a while, right? If you're waiting on the perfect thing, it will never come. It may look perfect on the surface. It may look like a really good thing on the surface, but everything has flaws. Everything. You may think this job is horrible. They don't give me benefits. Well, guess what? The next one may give you benefits, but it's going to come with a rigorous schedule that maybe is going to be hard to handle. Right? Maybe you've been divorced and you're gonna looking to remarry. You're like, man, it just was I married the wrong person. That second person will come with their own baggage as well. So it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because no matter what, that we are imperfect people, and the imperfections are not ever going to go away or disappear or cover up. You have to accept that life is going to be filled with imperfections. And the sooner you get to this place of acceptance, the quicker you will find God's peace in the middle. The sooner you will find God's peace amongst your circumstance, because there's people, and some of you know these people, and if you don't know these people, then you might be this person, okay? That all we do is we focus on everything that went wrong. Everything that went wrong, we just highlighted, right? Everything that went wrong, like your spouse disappoints, you didn't like what they said at church, you didn't like what they said at your job, you didn't like the staff meeting that you just left from, and all we do is highlight every single thing that's wrong. So if your spouse does disappoint, you still have the option to choose love. It's the greatest attribute within your control. If you're going through a business plan and it has a setback, well, guess what? A setback can only have a comeback if you keep moving. If you have a setback and you don't move, then you will be stuck in your setback. And some people are stuck in setback, waiting for things to get perfect again for them to get back up. And it's not going to happen that way. It doesn't happen that way, right? If your church disappoints you, the Great Commission still remains. The Great Commission that God gave you and I still remains. And when we don't have that as our primary focus, here's what happens. The Great Commission turns into the Great Complaint. And all we want to do is complain about everything. And all we do is complain about everything. Again, if you don't know anybody like this, it might be you. I'm just saying, I don't know. But here's what happens when you let this happen, is you grow bitter. And in your bitterness, you end up pushing people away from your life. And in your bitterness, you miss out on the future relationships you can have, the future joy you could have, the future purpose you could find if you were to simply get back out there again and not let your heart grow hard. Now, I love this, right? Because the Apostle Paul, who authors so much of the New Testament, a lot of the letters that he wrote were from prison. Right? A lot of the letters that he wrote were from prison. And one that stands out to me in particular is Philippians chapter 1, verse 15 through 18. And I love what this says, right? It says, "It is true that some preach Christ out of envy and rivalry, but others out of goodwill. The latter do so out of love, knowing that I'm put here for the defense of this gospel. The former preach Christ out of selfish ambition, not sincerely, supposing that they can stir up trouble for me while I'm in chains. But what does it matter? The important thing is that in every way, whether from false motives or true, Christ is preached. And because of this, I rejoice." Now, for the Apostle Paul, this is significant because what he's saying is, man, he goes, I know that there's people that have the wrong motive when they get up to a platform. They have the wrong motive in a pulpit, right? And I hate to admit this, but I've seen this happen in real life where the motive is just wrong. The motive is for self, not for Christ, but the motive is for self. But what he's saying, as an apostle, what he is saying, he says, but what does it matter? He says the message of Christ is being preached. And God will use it because he knew he wasn't focused about a finish line for that ministry. He was focused on the eternal finish line for those people knowing Christ at that ministry. So he was focused on the eternal finish line, and he said, man, I can rejoice because Christ is being preached. When people ask you about your faith, people question your faith, it may rattle your cage a little bit, but you need to rejoice after that they're asking about Christ. You need to rejoice after they're asking you, who is this God that you serve? Because it bothered them enough to talk about it, which means it was on their mind long enough for them to talk about it. So I'll rejoice. Come on now, I'll rejoice when that happens. I'll rejoice. Because guess what? It's a conversation that otherwise we probably wouldn't have had. But again, it's knowing and still looking at this from the perspective that, you know what? Things aren't going to be perfect. There is no perfect church. And if you're coming here thinking that this is one, sorry, like there's a door. If you think that this is perfect, it's not perfect. It's not. It's far from it. There is no perfect church. But if it proclaims Christ, God uses it for eternal good. If it proclaims Christ, God will use it for eternal good. Now, I love just again how the tone in which he writes this, because again, it just shows that he's not sweating this. He's not stressed out. He's just saying, hey, it's true that some people preach Christ out of envy and rivalry. It's true that this happens. The former preach Christ out of selfish ambition, not sincerely, because they want to stir up trouble for me while I'm in chains. But what does it matter? The important thing is that every way, whether from false motive or true, Christ is preached. And again, for us, I think that taking this step in our life, if we're going to have a new focus, it is accepting the reality and the truth that we live in an imperfect nature, and we will always live in an imperfect nature. The only place that any of us will ever find perfection is in heaven. So stop trying to fabricate heaven, because you can't. You can't. And sometimes some of us, we feel this stress trying to make it happen in our own way, our own heaven. No, God will bring heaven down to earth. And perfection will only exist when we are up with him in heaven. But knowing and trusting that even when things aren't okay, even when things aren't perfect, I can still be focused on the things of God. I can still have joy. I can still have hope in the things of God. Now, you may be listening to this and telling yourself, man, it's easier said than done. And you're right. It is. It's hard. But again, if we look back to that first verse that we had, and we'll go ahead and put that back up in 2 Corinthians, don't lose heart. Don't lose heart. Therefore, we do not lose heart. Though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed. Say it with me, day by day. Inwardly, day by day, you and I are being renewed. Inwardly, every single day, day by day, God is renewing us. Day by day, God is changing us. This new focus happens every day. Now, this doesn't mean that you get saved every single day, right? Your salvation is a one-time event. But however, as we follow Christ day by day, our discipleship process and our discipleship journey happens every single day. Now, I want you to think about this, and I told Jared to correct me if I was wrong on this, because I have no kind of musical concept, really. Okay, I tell myself I can sing, but that's my wife's opinion and mine, so I'm not sure how much truth there's to that. But when Jared has to tune a guitar, okay, I would imagine that it requires a little bit of focus to tune a guitar. It might be kind of difficult in a room like this if everybody's talking or yelling, or if we bring the kids from Kids Church back over here, it would be kind of hard to tune that guitar, right? Because it requires some kind of focus and some attentiveness, right? And if Jared, can you guys imagine that if Jared came up here and he tried to tune the guitar, and he took the guitar and he played something, and then it just sounded all, funky. And just imagine Jared being like, man, and then just like turning over and smashing the guitar. And then we'd all be like, Jared, what are you doing, man? He's like, man, it's not tuned, man. It's not tuned. I gotta build a new guitar, man. It's not tuned. And he said, I gotta build another one, right? No, see, this is how focus works. You don't throw it all away, right? You gotta give it some time. You got to get a tool. I think there's a little tool that you put up to the guitar, right, that tells you how the note is playing. You got to maybe get into the closet and where it's not as loud and you can hear a little bit better, and you take some time to calibrate it and reset it. When your cell phone or a computer tells you that it needs an update, how many of you guys are taking your cell phone and just chucking it into the river? Because I tell you, if you got an Apple product, that thing update like every week, it seemed like, right? So I would be in good business in my regular day job, because y'all would need phones every week. Right? But you don't throw it away. No, you don't throw it away. You know what you do? For a cell phone, you take it, you plug it into the charger on the wall, you put it on your Wi-Fi, and you let it do its thing. Because it takes time to do an update. And I want to tell you that for some of us, we may find ourselves in a place where we're struggling and it's difficult, and maybe the business is failing, or maybe the marriage is failing, or maybe a situation is failing. You don't throw it away. You take some time, you fix your focus, and you tune up some things. You fix and recalibrate your focus. You don't throw things away. You allow God to fix them. I want to tell you, like I told the cell phone, right? Get plugged into a community that can help you. Get connected to a stronger signal that is your Heavenly Father, and let Him speak to you. And sit back and watch what God does. When you make time to recalibrate your focus, what can God do in your life if you let your focus be brought and made new? You got to allow God to get you in focus. You got to allow God. You got to make room for God every single day of your life. And you got to let your focus become new by letting it become new daily. Accept the imperfections. Accept the imperfections of your life. Yes, you know what? Nobody's life is perfect. I don't care how good it looks on Facebook. Nobody's life is perfect. And if you live your life thinking that it's only when you find perfection or it's only when things are perfect that you'll be happy, it's only when things are perfect then you can focus and move forward in other things, then you're wrong. God wants to give us a new focus, accepting the reality that things aren't perfect. But just because things are perfect doesn't mean we can't be focused. And as we get this new level of focus, then we can all remember and be reminded of what our actual finish line is. What our actual finish line in our life is. Because too many of us have been living life finishing a lot of markers, a lot of checkpoints, and yet we're still disappointed. See, if we're going to have a different result in 2022, then we got to be willing to have a new focus that we haven't had before. If you want to see God move differently in your life than he did last year, then you got to make God more of a central part of your focus this year in 2022. You got to fine-tune that focus to bring yourself back to Christ every single day. Sundays enough won't do it. Sundays by itself won't do it. I'm telling you right now that Sundays are not going to be the reason why. But you got to renew it every single day. I saw this video. It was funny. This guy was making this video and he takes he's holding it up to the mirror and he's in the mirror and he goes, "This is me 1 week after attending church," right? And then he comes back and he goes, "This is me 2 weeks in the same outfit." Comes back, "This is me 2 weeks after attending church." And he comes back again. He goes, "This is me a month after attending church," and he looks the same every single one. He looks the same. He goes, "Here's the moral of the story. Church isn't going to change you. A relationship with Christ will change you. So you can go to church as much as you want, but if you don't accept Christ and surrender and give your life over to him, then your life isn't going to change, my friend. I hate to break it to you. You know what? You might be in a better mood on Sundays, and you might be in a better start on Monday. Maybe it'll do that for you. But Christ is who transforms. Christ is the one that does the work in us. Christ is the one that can mend those pieces back together. Christ is the one that will let the treasure in your heart, in your clay, withstand and stand the pressure and the stress of life and not break. Christ is the one that does that. So we got to fix our focus on that. We got to fix our focus and find it with Christ every single day. Because he's the one that does the work. Amen. Let's all stand up. I want to pray for us as we close our service today. I want to invite you all to just close your eyes and bow your heads with me. I know there's some people in here that they're feeling like, "Man, Pastor, right now my clay is broken. My clay is broken." And I just want you to know that God says that even though it may be fractured, it is still intact. You are still intact. And here's the amazing thing about our God is that our God is the one that restores and redeems us. Though you may find yourself in a fractured state, you're not destroyed, you're still here. And we can thank God for that because he who began a good work in you will see it to completion in your life. And God does that. Christ does that in our lives. With every eye closed and every head bowed, and those of you that are watching online, if you've never made the decision to allow Christ to come into your heart, I want you to think of yourself as that clay. And it's time for you to receive the treasure that God has for you. The treasure that you didn't earn, but rather that God gave freely for you. And you can receive the clay simply by choosing to receive it. God is so good that he gives us free will. But he wants us to choose him. He wants us to choose love. He wants us to choose mercy. He wants us to choose forgiveness. And we can do so once we accept and receive him. And so with every eye closed, if you've never received Jesus as your Lord and Savior, and those of you watching online, if that's you, just say, "Hey, that's me," in the comments. Or if you're in this place, just raise up your hands. If you want to receive Thank you for dying for me and defeating death so that I may have life today, but have everlasting life as well. Come into my heart by faith in Jesus' name. Heavenly Father, I thank you that right now you are dropping scales off of our eyes, God. You are tearing down the veil, God. And Father, you are fixing our focus, God, onto you and your things, Father. The things of heaven, God. And I pray that as we do that, Father, that you, God, would make it so that you could bring heaven down to earth, God, in our lives. But I thank you, Father, that it is by focusing on you and having that new focus, God, that will bring the result.